Good to see you. My name's Tim. I'm one of the teaching pastors here at Blackhawk. And hi. How are you? How has the day been for you? Good. All right. Yeah, spontaneous applause. It's always a good thing. Yeah, good. I hope it's been a day of kind of inspiration, a chance for you to check out of maybe your normal weekly rhythm. Tomorrow is Sunday, right? Which means a lot of us are going right back into the rhythm, right? You get that. But I hope this has just been a day for you to take a break, to hear new ideas, to be around people of like mind, and to get some fresh perspective on what we're doing. So that video is very powerful, yes? So the reason why we showed that, the content and the main message of that video actually has nothing to do with what I'm going to talk about, but it's a great example of the power of the medium of video to draw you into a world and to mess with your mind, right? And to do things to you. And it's a good example of the way that medium can function in a gathering of followers of Jesus. So that video was produced by one of our artists here at Blackhawk, a young woman named Melissa Lazar, very talented, and she makes these kinds of things all the time. And it's been a really powerful tool, and maybe kind of click some ideas for you about how you might use this medium, the video, storytelling or the form of video, in your own gatherings. And I'll talk about what that video was doing to us as we watched it as I go along here. So it's a privilege to be here. Again, I'm the teaching pastor here, one of the teaching pastors here at Blackhawk. And Paul said, I was going to leave it at that, but Paul said I'm supposed to say that I'm only going to be that for another month or so here. I'm heading back to the promised land for me, which is Portland, Oregon. So that's where I grew up and where I'm from, and the Lord opened up a door for me to join the pastoral team of a really new church right in the heart of Portland called Door of Hope. And so I'm excited about that, and sad to be leaving Blackhawk, but there you go. And this may be my last Pulse. This is my third time speaking at Pulse. I've really enjoyed it every time. So ask Paul to fly me back or something, and I'll be happy to come back again. So what I'd like to put on our plate and help us consider this afternoon. I know this is the food coma session when we're all struggling to stay awake, so I'll do my best with that. But what I'd like to put on our plates is what the Bible and artists and comic books have in common, and what we might learn about our own creative work by combining the three of these in some way. So I'm curious, how many of us, this room will be a very interesting sample, I think. How many of us grew up reading comic books? Oh, yes. Now, that's much larger than rooms of other folks that I've asked before, too. So that's great. I kind of expected that. Not do you read them now. That might be kind of embarrassing. But you grew up reading them. So I'm kind of tipping my hat here. So I loved and immersed myself in the world of comic books when I was growing up. And in fact, I grew up in Portland, and I grew up 2 blocks from the largest comic book store in the city of Portland. And so I'd like to show it to you here on Google Street View. It's Excalibur Books and Comics, Excalibur, right? So, and most of the employees at Excalibur when I was growing up were well over their 40s, all male. So I'll let you put that together. But anyway, so, and here's the cool thing about Google Street View. I don't know if they've done this for every city or something, but at least in Portland and in other places, you can actually go inside businesses now, in restaurants, in Google Street. Did you know this? It's awesome. Not everyone, but just some. So here you go. So you can walk inside on Google Street View. And here's the inside of Excalibur Books and Comics. Now, it was a panorama photo, so I had to break it in half and do that, as you can see, to make it work. But there you go. So let's just kind of keep that up there. This was a very important space for me in my developing years, from ages about 9 to about 14. So, about 4th, 5th grade through 8th grade. And I would wander up here with my allowance or mowing lawn money. And you see those little boxes, or little slot boxes on the right there? See that? Those are subscription boxes for locals, right? So I was one of those. So I had a little subscription box, and I was subscribed to about 6 different lines of comics and so on, and so they would come staggering rotation. So about every Friday I'd wander up to Excalibur and look at my subscription box. I'd check the archives and the new stuff, and there you go. So total geek. I know that. That's okay. But this space right there had an enormous influence on my imagination when I was growing up. So my parents are Christians, and I did grow up, kind of around the Bible and Sunday school and that kind of thing. But I never really read the Bible on my own, and by the middle school, high school, whatever, I just kind of had checked out of all things to do with church and Jesus and so on. And so I didn't really pick up the Bible and start reading it until I was almost 20 years old when I became a follower of Jesus. And so the comic book store had a much greater influence on my developing worldview and imagination than the Bible ever did when I was growing up. Now, I don't know what you think about that. In retrospect, I've come to be forever grateful for that fact. And here's why. Because the world of comic books, again, this is a quarter of the people in the room will get this, so I'll try and explain it to the rest of us. But so the world of comic books it's all different kinds of people and heroes and so on. But the world of comic books is essentially a world of a great drama. There's a great drama going on, and it's this contest between good and evil. And in my favorite lines of comics, like the X-Men and so on, the line between good and evil was always confusing because the heroes were actually usually morally compromised themselves, right? So my favorite hero growing up was a guy named the Punisher. And his family was murdered, his wife and kids were kidnapped and murdered or whatever, and so he became a vigilante, and he would just go murder murderers, essentially. And that was, but he was this very conflicted man and so on lots of meds, but that was his deal. And so the Punisher, X-Men, I loved those heroes because they were the most interesting to me because good and evil was not clearly divided between the good guys and the bad guys. Often the villains had traces of good in them. The heroes were morally compromised in some way. But there was a clear contest going on, a battle between good and evil. And usually there's two worlds of comics, at least when I was growing up, DC and Marvel. I thought Marvel heroes were way better. And usually because the heroes in Marvel comics were very average, kind of normal, everyday people who stumble into the drama through some whatever. They get bit by a spider or aliens visit them or something, right? And so but then they get ushered through this experience into the great drama, right, of world-shaking events. And then almost always, at least in Marvel comics, again, the heroes in the contest between good and evil, they suffer horribly. Sometimes they die. And then you have to find a way to bring them back to life again. Or they did actually die, but they let you think that for 3 issues or whatever. But that's the world. And good always wins. Always wins. But just barely. Just barely. And that's the world of comic books. And I've come, like I said, to be very thankful that was the story world that I grew up in. Because when I picked up the Bible when I was 20 years old, I found my imagination had been perfectly prepared for reading the storyline of the Bible. And the thing about what's going on with the storyline of the Bible is that it is an alternate story world, but it's making the scandalous claim that it's the world that you and I are actually living in, right? It claims to be a true story of the world. And so what comic books and what the Bible are doing is they're trying to influence our imaginations. And that's what was happening when I was going to Excalibur books and comics. My imagination was being shaped. Now, you could define imagination a lot of different ways. But at least for me, and at least what I'm going to try and help us think about, is our imagination it's our view of the world as we know it. It's one piece. And what's possible in that world. But your imagination is also your ability or your capability to push the boundaries of what's possible. And to think about other worlds where there are different kinds of things going on. And and this is the thing about is it imaginary or real? Well, sometimes the line between that is blurred, right? Did you guys know about the solar flare storm that hit Earth on Thursday? Anybody read about this? Right? It was supposed to disturb GPS systems or something, and you're like, what was going on? There was an explosion on the surface of the sun that hurled electromagnetic storm at Earth. You know what I mean? And you're like, this is a strange world. You know what I'm saying? Like, what? This is just a bizarre place. And you're reminded of that from time to time, right? Or did anybody see the Planet Earth documentary series, BBC? Planet Earth, is that right? Was that what it was called? And I'm thinking of this illustration right now. It might not be a good one. I don't know. But did anybody see the deep sea one? The deep sea one. And these strange strange species of fish or something like fish, that exist that have never been seen before, and you're looking at them going, this is a strange world. It's like alien life, but it's real. Our imagination is our ability to walk between what we define as real, but then also pushing the boundaries of what we consider real. Maybe the world is stranger than we think. Maybe other kinds of things are possible. It's our imagination that allows us to do that. And comic books have as their aim to shape people's imaginations. The Bible has as its aim to shape people's imaginations. And I would submit to you that your work as an artist of whatever kind also has a similar aim: to influence people's imaginations, to influence people's view of the world and of what's possible in that world. And perhaps what people viewing your work in whatever form it is, they have an idea of what the real world is, and you want them to consider a new thing about the world, or maybe a different way of thinking about the world. Art, comic books, and the Bible are aimed at influencing people's imaginations. Leonard Bernstein, he's an American composer and conductor. He put it this way. This is one of my favorite quotes about the impact of art on people. He says, "A great work of art revives and readapts time and space, making you an inhabitant of its world. It invites you in and lets you breathe its strange, special air." So think about what you're doing, whatever form, and I realize there's many different types of creative expression represented in the room here. So whether it's music or songwriting, whether it's the visual arts, painting, graphic, film, video, whatever, it's movement or dance or writing, whatever. I'm sure I'm leaving something out and offending someone, so I'm sorry. But whatever creative medium you are interested in or a part of, what you're doing is you're making something. You're making a world. And you may not think about it like that, but that's what you're doing. You're creating a piece. You're creating an artifact, an object of some kind, and you're hoping that someone will look at that and have an experience with it. Maybe you're creating a moment in some kind of performance. You're putting something, you're creating an experience for someone with music or whatever. You're creating an alternate world, is what you're doing. You're inviting people to consider this form or this shape or color in a new way. You're inviting people to hear a story or to consider a view of the world that maybe they wouldn't normally have. And you might be trying to do different things with your creative expression. You might be trying to challenge or shock, right? Or inform or encourage or provoke, whatever. But what Bernstein is saying is you're creating a world, a story world, so to speak. And you're inviting someone in and saying, think about things from this perspective. You're influencing someone's imagination when you do that. And so in my mind, there's actually a great deal to learn about whatever form of creative expression you're in, to think in a new way. How am I influencing people's imaginations? What kinds of questions could I ask that might help me think about my work from a new angle? And what does it mean if you're followers of Jesus, right, for the Bible to somehow play a role in your creative inspiration for whatever work you do? So I don't know if you like reading the Bible. Maybe you do, so we are followers of Jesus, most of us, I think, and so we're supposed to like it, Some of us have a strange relationship to the Bible, like your weird uncle or something, and you're like, I know I'm supposed to like being around him, but I actually don't, I don't know, whatever. You may not, I don't know what role the Bible plays in your life or in your creative work, but really think about this. If the Bible has the same basic aim that you do as an artist, which is to shape and influence people's imaginations, then perhaps there could be a way to ramp up or to think about the way the Bible relates to your creative work in a new and fresh way. And so that's what I'd like to put on the table in the time that we have left. The way your artistic expression and the way the Bible can influence people's imaginations. And to do that, I'd like to draw on the work of one of the greatest well-known artists of the 20th century. He was named the author of the century at the end of the century. He died in like the late 1970s. And he was a writer and he was also a scholar of ancient, medieval English and European literature. Anybody? Ah, exactly. Well, they were friends. Yeah, right. A guy named John Ronald Reuel Tolkien. Yeah, Tolkien. Now, Tolkien, he created a whole world over the course of his career of about 30 years. Of course, The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit are the most well-known of his work. But he went on, and beforehand, he created a whole story world of Middle-earth in about a dozen other works that he published, and making up languages that don't exist, you know what I'm saying? Elven and so on, and doing all this kind of thing. It was a fascinating, and he was a committed follower of Jesus. I think most of us probably know that. And so he did a lot of reflecting on the power of alternate story worlds to shape and influence people. And he collected those reflections of what am I doing as I create Middle-earth, essentially. He compacted and put all that together in an essay that's little known. It's called On Fairy Stories. Has anyone heard of this before? So Tom Hansen, are you in the room? Tom, there you go, hi. So remember, you recommended that I read this about 1.5 years ago. So thank you. So maybe you should be giving this talk, I don't know. But he reflects on what am I doing when I create an alternate story world and inviting people into it and trying to shape their imagination, essentially. And when I first read the essay, I walked away and I thought, oh my gosh, he has just described brilliantly the way the Bible works on people. And as I later went on to reflect, I've come to think that he has described the way art works on people, influencing their imaginations. And he has 3 kind of insights, and I'll put these, briefly explore them on the table, and I would just encourage you to jot them down and think of them as ways of perhaps opening some new vistas in your own work, or putting some new questions to your work and how it might help you, whatever, to be a better person or something, I don't know. But I've found these 3 observations really be helpful and powerful. Tolkien reflected on the power of fairy stories, is what he called them. Now, he does not mean stories about fairies, right? Like little sprites with wings or whatever. There may be fairies in whatever your song that you write or something. There may not be. But what he really means is any artistic expression. He's talking about writing, but I think it applies more broadly, and it applies to what the Bible is doing. You're creating an alternate world. You're telling a story. You're inviting people into an experience of some kind. And you're pushing the boundaries of people's imaginations, right? The world you invite people into might be similar to the world that we call the real world, or it might be totally unlike it, or it might kind of go in between, like the world of comic books. But you're trying to push the boundaries of what's possible. And he says the power of fairy stories or of imaginative literature, and I think this is the power of the Bible, is it does a few things. The first thing he explores is what he calls recovery. Recovery. So we hear the English word recovery, and we think, I don't know what you think. We think of you had surgery or something, and you need a time of recovery. Or someone has a substance addictions, and they go into recovery or something like that. And it's not really what he means, but there's a little bit of overlap, right, kind of the metaphor there. What Tolkien's getting at is he says inviting people into another story world is you have the potential to help someone recover a view of the world that they almost certainly have lost. And it's the view of the world that all of us have in like the first 5 to 10 years of our life. Namely, the world is still incredible when you're a little kid. You know what I'm saying? So Paul was talking about his beautiful little daughter, Ada, and she's pretty cute, yeah? Ada's favorite playmate is my son, Roman, who's 8 months old, who rivals Ada's cuteness. I don't know. I didn't bring pictures. I realized I should have anyway. So watching, my favorite thing about living with a little human is just watching his developing imagination, right? And so, when the snowstorms came, he was born in July, the snowstorms came this winter, and for him to watch snow falling out the window the first time, it was just, what a privilege to be there for that. And he was just like, what is this, Previously, he did not know a world with white stuff falling from the sky, right? And then all of a sudden, he's realizing, his little brain is having to now accommodate this new reality, right? the world just got a bit stranger and when he looked out that window. The world is full of wonder and mystery and new experiences that are pushing a little child's idea of what's possible in the world. But there's a shift that happens when we get enculturated, when we get into the world of like the hierarchy of middle school or elementary school, and then you're constantly just worried about your self-image and you stop caring about how wonderful the world is or whatever. And so Tolkien says the power of imaginative literature, of art, and of the Bible is to help people recover a view of the world that they've lost. So when my son, when he was brand new, I could go like this in front of him for like about 5-10 minutes, and he was just like in a trance, because it's like shape, movement, you know what I mean? And it's connected to this voice who's always smells like coffee breath or whatever, but it's right there. He's always in my face going like this, and he's totally fascinated. He's 8 months old now. Do you think this holds his attention? He's like, Dad, get out of my way. I want to look at the snow falling. He's already losing the wonder that do you see what I'm saying? This is just part of growing up. And this happens to us on a grand scale over the course of our lives. So we live in this magnificent world full of crazy, solar storms and creatures at the bottom of the sea. But we don't think about that anymore. We just become accommodated to our world. And so what imaginative literature can do is lock on to elements of the ordinary and to open them up and make them full of wonder and mystery again. That's one way to influence someone's imagination, is help them recover a world full of wonder. And Tolkien was a master at this in his story worlds. Let me show you a picture of here. Who's that? Remember this guy from the story? Treebeard. Mm-hmm. So is he a tree? Right. So he's an Ent. He's an Ent. A race of beings who are trees but not trees. They're shepherds of trees. And they might for a while become trees, but then they can come back again and so on, be woken up and so on. And so what's happening? What's happening here? So what Tolkien has done is he's created a world in which trees are alive, and yes, we all know that, but we're bored with trees. We drive by them all the time, and we don't just ogle at them or something. Oh, it's so amazing. We don't care about trees anymore. And so what Tolkien has done is he's created a race of beings, of creatures who are trees but yet not trees. And these trees have their own language. They have their own history, their own culture. And they really don't care about humans very much. You know what I mean? It's dwarves and elves or whatever. They're kind of indifferent unless their interests of those creatures crosses the Ents, and then they care, and then they get involved, and then they go back to the forest. But what happens after you meet Treebeard and all the other tree shepherds in the story? You think about trees in a new way, right? I mean, I don't know if this happened to you, but it totally happens to me when I'm like hiking or walking now. This story comes into my mind. And I rethink the forest that I'm in. This is a place of wonder, and a mystery. And these things are alive, and they might be listening to me, or they might do something to me. It's recovery. That's recovery, right? You're helping people recover a view, because you don't know that as a little kid when you're first looking in the tree. We have a tree in our front yard, and I take our little son Roman out, and all I do is scrape my hands on the bark, and he just bursts out laughing. And I'm just like, what is going on in his little head? You know what I mean? That is a sensible response to me going like this on the tree. But you know what I'm saying? His imagination is still being formed. Recovery of the imagination is one of the goals of imaginative literature. It's one of the goals of the Bible. So think about the way that the Bible talks about creation, or what we call the natural world. I mean, did you know that there is almost no passage in the Bible that talks about and explores the natural world that does not use the form of poetry? Almost all of the creation exploration in the Bible is poetry. That should tell us something, right? Because poetry is not, as Paul was talking earlier, poetry is not utilitarian, right? It's not useful. It's aimed at emotive engagement with people's imaginations. And so you read a psalm like Psalm 104, and it's talking about how God's ruach, his spirit, his breath, is present, animating and sustaining all creation. And so we're asked to consider the idea that whenever a creature dies, it's like God's ruach, his breath, is withdrawing from the creature. And Psalm 104 asks you to entertain the idea that whenever a new creature is born, it's like God's Spirit renewing the creation, the poet says. I doubt you would think that if you saw a deer squatting in the woods or something, giving birth, would you say, it's God's Spirit right there? But that's what the poet's trying to get you to see. The creation poetry all over the Bible is all aimed at recovery. It's all aimed at recovery of a wonderful view of the world. And so I would just put the question to you like this. Think about your own work. Think about where the Bible has helped you recover a view of the world that you could share with others. Not in like a cheap way, put the Jesus fish on your painting or something like that. That's not what I mean. But it's in the deep structure of the message of what you're doing, the medium. You're helping people recover a view of the world that we've lost. And in many ways, I think that's what that Faces video was doing. Because when you are in someone's face, which most of us aren't very often, when you're up close to someone's face like that, what's happening? We're around people all the time, and we don't care about people, you know what I'm saying? Like, we aren't brought to tears. I don't know if the video did that to you, but it brings out, did you feel it when you were watching all those faces? There's something going on inside of you, and you're just like, people are incredible. Humans are amazing, you know what I mean? But we don't think that when we're wandering around out there. We're just like, oh, go look at the painting. I want to get a bottle of water now, or whatever, So it's recovery. That's what that video was doing. It was recovering something that we've lost, the beauty of a human being, the transcendence of the image of God in a human being. It's recovery. That's the first aspect that Tolkien explores. The second thing that he says, imaginative literature or art aimed at people's imaginations, is what he calls escape. Escape. Now, I don't know what you think about this. You might at first think, wait a minute, no. If my work enables people to escape the world, how many of you think that's a good thing? Yeah, so if we say something is escapist, or it's just escapism, usually that's a way of dismissing something, to say it's irrelevant. It's just fairy tale, you know what I mean? It doesn't have to do with the real world. And in many ways, that's often how people dismiss the Bible, right? It's old, ancient, irrelevant, outmoded. It doesn't have anything to do with the real world. And Tolkien challenges that. He said escape has a very important role in the shaping of the human imagination. Not to escape for the purposes of just disengaging from the world, just the opposite. He says escape is one of the most valuable things a human can do to protest what's going on in the real world. So think about, there's a great example of this, a children's book by a guy named Maurice Sendak. And you may not know his name, but you know the story here, Where the Wild Things Are. Anybody? Yeah? Yeah, Where the Wild Things Are. This is imagination and escape as a form of protest. So you have little Max here swinging in the trees, right? And so the story begins, he's playing in his living room in a wolf costume. And he's making a mess, whatever. His mother gets annoyed, and so he's being naughty or something, whatever, I don't know, playing wolf. So he gets sent up to his room without dinner. And so what does he do up in his room? He's angry at the oppressive regime of the parents, And he protests their view of the real world in which little boys aren't supposed to knock things over and play in wolf suits downstairs. So what does he do? He withdraws into this imaginary world where the wild things are. And it's full of all these terrifying monsters, but he's the most terrifying monster of all because he can stare any creature down without blinking, right? And so he earns the respect of all the monsters, and then they go into the wild rumpus and so on, and there you go. I don't know, the movie was not that good, but the book is really incredible. So this is what's he doing as he escapes? You might say, well, it's escape just as a way of consoling himself. It's escape as a way of just saying pie in the sky, a way of dealing with his disappointment with the real world. And yes, I suppose some of that's true, but what Tolkien says is there are things worth being disappointed about in the real world, yes? There are things about the world that are worth escaping, yes? There are things in the world worth protesting and saying, what if it could be different? Absolutely. And it's our imagination that enables us to think about how the world could be different. What if a different kind of world were possible, where there isn't the oppressive parent regime, or where there aren't oppressive regimes? Imagine that world. Is it possible? Imagine a world, free of the things that plague our world and that are on, most of our minds. This, seems like insolvable problems, sex trafficking or something, poverty or hunger. Can you imagine a world without those things? And if you can't imagine a world without those things, then Tolkien would argue, then you're probably not going to be able to do anything about those things. But what if the world, what would it look like if those things didn't exist? Or if those things changed? It's escape. And in my mind, the gospel, the storyline of the Bible, is precisely a story of escape. Not so that we disengage with the world, but that so we engage. Because we believe a different kind of world full of different possibilities has become real in the story of the gospel. The Apostle Paul puts it this way in one of a moment of height of theological poetry in the Bible, in my view. He's talking about the resurrection in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. He says, let me reveal to you a wonderful secret. We will not all die, but we will all be transformed. It will happen in a moment, in the blink of an eye, when the last trumpet is blown. For when the trumpet sounds, those who have died will be raised to live forever. Yeah, get real, Paul. Come on. Are you serious? Can you imagine a world where death doesn't have the last word? That's what Paul's trying to do here. He says, where was I? Oh, yeah, and we who are living will also be transformed. For our dying bodies must be transformed into bodies that will never die. Our mortal bodies must be transformed into immortal bodies. And then when our dying bodies have been transformed into bodies that will never die, this scripture will be fulfilled. He's right to it, and then what does he quote? He quotes poetry from the Hebrew poets. And he says, death is swallowed up in victory. Oh, death, where is your victory? Death, where is your sting? For sin is the sting that results in death, and the law gives sin its power. But thank God, he gives us victory over sin and death through our Lord Jesus Christ. Let's just pause real quick here. I want you to leave it up there. There are many people, I would say many people who are indifferent to Christianity, indifferent to the gospel or whatever, who would say, get real. You know what I'm saying? You're living in a fairy tale if you think this is true, right? You think you can escape death. You're weirdos. You know what I'm saying? That's weird. That's like going to the comic book store and somehow thinking that's the real world. And what the gospel is trying to do is to say, is it possible that a different kind of world actually exists? Is it possible that your idea of the real world is actually not real at all? What if this is the story of the real world? It's a form of escape. Escape is allowing people to step out of their definition of the real world so that they can entertain a new idea. What if the world were different? And look what Paul does. For Paul, escape does not mean withdrawal or disengagement. Look what he says here. He says, so, my dear brothers and sisters, be strong. Let nothing move you. Always give yourselves fully to the work of the Lord, for you know that your labors for the Lord are not in vain. Paul says the gospel allows you to escape death so that you can engage in the world. You know what I'm saying? This is not pie in the sky where you just withdraw and let the world go to hell in a handbasket or something. He says the gospel says we live in a world where death does not have to have the last word. So what are you going to do with your waking hours? You know what I'm saying? That's the idea. Escape. Escape as a form of protest against the so-called real world. The last piece, and it's very much similar to the second, is what Tolkien calls consolation. Consolation. And by consolation, here's what he means. He means happy endings, essentially. Happy endings. The happy ending. And he says there's two kinds of happy endings. The first kind is cheap. It's cheap, it's tawdry, it's unrealistic, and it doesn't do justice to most of our experience. In me, this is perfectly summarized by every romantic comedy I've ever seen. Right? So I hate watching romantic comedies, and my wife hates watching them with me because the whole time I'm just like, get real. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just so, things don't happen like this. This is so dumb. This is way beyond the boundaries of reality. You know what I'm saying? And it's just cheap. It's like 30-minute sitcoms. Everything gets resolved so quickly and easily and so on. Tolkien says that's one kind of happy ending. That's not what he's talking about. He says the power of imaginative literature is its ability to influence people, draw them into a world that looks evil or suffering or hardship or conflict, just looks at just dead in the eye. Full account of the reality of evil and hardship. And in the children's story, it's whatever, having to go upstairs without dinner or something. But this is, and think of Tolkien in The Lord of the Rings, in Middle-earth that he's created. He says the second kind of happy ending that the art aimed at people's imaginations can accomplish is what he coins a new word. He calls it stories that end with the eucatastrophe, which it's actually putting two Greek words together. He was a language scholar, so he does this kind of thing for fun, right? So you at the beginning there is a little prefix in Greek that means good or happy, and catastrophe means catastrophe. So the happy disaster, stories that resolve with a disaster, and good wins at the same time. So think of how Tolkien accomplished a happy ending at the end of the story of The Lord of the Rings. And I'm guessing most of us have seen the movies in some form. Are you leaping for joy in the last seconds of the film? Do you remember the last seconds of the film? It was terribly sad and depressing. Because the hero has suffered so much that he has to leave Middle-earth, right? Frodo, the suffering hero. And everyone's crying. You're crying. The first time I read it, I just wept when I finished the last book. So it's just like, this is horrible. But yet this is the way that the good wins. And so it's a realistic view of evil. It's not ignoring evil or suffering, but it is saying there is something deep in our soul that we know that evil cannot win. Horrible things happen, but evil cannot win, or else this is not the kind of world that I want to live in. You know what I'm saying? We know deep in our bones that there are disasters, but that somehow, it's like Martin Luther King Jr. said, the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. He said, it bends towards the healing and the setting right of all things. And Tolkien says the ability to invite people into a world of whatever kind, through art, through literature, and provide a eucatastrophe where the heroes suffer or die, where things are absolutely horrible. And the happy ending is not cheap. The happy ending is a gift of grace, he says. That's the word he says he uses. It's grace. So that you never would have expected things to work out this way. He says to give people that experience, the catch of the breath when things resolve. He says you are giving people a taste of something that's beyond any imaginative world we could possibly think of. And this is brilliant. He says this is where he just comes out as a Christian. He's writing this, this essay for literary folks, and he just comes out as a Christian. He just says every happy ending that you have ever heard or seen, every resolution of a story, is actually pointing to something beyond our imaginations. It's the story of the capital C, no, the capital H, happy ending, as it were. It's the gospel. It's the gospel. He says, every happy ending you've ever experienced, that catch of the breath, oh, what if? What if life was actually like that? He says, it is like that. And that's why we constantly tell stories about it. We're telling stories about the gospel even though we don't know that, because we provide happy endings. And so he puts it this way. We'll just quote him here. He says, in the eucatastrophe of fairy stories, we see in a brief vision a far-off gleam or echo of the gospel in the real world. The gospel contains a fairy story of a larger kind which embraces all the essence of fairy stories. There is no tale ever told that humans would rather find was true than the gospel, yes? The happy ending of fairy stories looks forward to the great eucatastrophe. But this story, see, it's supreme and it is true. In the gospel, art has been verified. God is the Lord of angels, of men, and of elves. Legend and history have met and fused. The gospel does not abrogate legends, rather it has hallowed them. Is that profound? Oh, it's Tolkien. I should just stop talking now. So Every happy ending you've ever seen is a holy, sacred thing that you're giving to people. Don't give them the cheap happy ending. Give them the real thing that has looked death square in the face and says there's a way of escape. And it's not pie in the sky. It's real. Help people recover that view of the world full of mystery and wonder that we had. He says this is the power of art, of story, to influence people's imaginations. It's precisely what the Bible is trying to do. We hold in our hands the most powerful source of imaginative influence that the human race has ever known. So again, I don't know what your relationship is to the Bible or what role it plays in your creative process, but Tolkien's put on our plate 3 ways to rethink your own work and the way the Bible could help shape your view of your work. Your work is sacred. Do you realize this? Whatever form of expression, it's sacred. You're influencing people when you do what you do. It's a sacred task. And it's a huge responsibility to shape someone's imagination. I'm going to close us in a word of prayer, and I would just ask you to reflect on what this could mean, what Tolkien's ideas could do for you if you were to ask those questions in a new way to your work. And then Sarah Groves is going to come and give us some more time for reflection and worship and in song. Let me close us with a word of prayer. Lord, we thank you for the gift of grace, for the hope and the trust because of the resurrection that this tale, this great contest and drama of good and evil, of the suffering hero who dies to conquer death and give us grace. Lord, we stake our lives on that story. And Lord, may that story, through the power of your Spirit, provide ever fresh perspective on our own work, on our responsibilities, on our creative endeavors. We ask you to give us a new vision of how we could come alongside what you are already doing in the Scriptures and to help influence people's imagination to dream of a world in which you're real, in which you're beautiful and good, in which you've come to rescue and to save and to heal. We thank you for the sacred responsibility that we've been given. We want to do it well. And by your grace, may we do so, we pray in the name of Jesus. Amen. Amen.